MGM, the Ear Glue Media Network.
You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 282, Dooku, Jedi Lost. We are going to tackle the recently released Star Wars radio drama / audiobook and kind of give you our insights and perspective on how things shook out as we listen to that. And joining me tonight, as always, is the latest member of the Lost 20, now the Lost 21. Please welcome Jonesy to the show. Jonesy, can I start calling you Joe? Is it like for short? You can call me
I can
Al.
call you Al or Pa.
That's a Paul Simon song, by the way. You can call me
Yeah,
Al.
I know. That's a good song, too.
Yeah. You'll get that reference a little bit later. Yeah, we're old. One, we're old. Two, that reference will mean a lot more here in just a little bit. So let's get started with the news. And we've got a couple things here to talk about. A lot of Disney park stuff. Galaxy's Edge, of course. And that had its big grand opening last week. And we were, I think, fortunate to have a number of folks that were related, no, I shouldn't say related to, acquainted with, I should say, either on social media or within Discord, that kind of thing. But we've got some pretty good feedback from those folks. But I think Chris, Johnny, Ronald, Katie. Well, I guess what's the overall? If you had to summarize some of the thoughts and impressions that they were giving as they attended the park, how would you summarize that?
It sounds like the experience is great in a word. I've really not heard any complaints, and which is really comforting, right? So first weekend, usually you get a lot of the, it rides down, things like that. Things aren't going as smoothly, but it sounds like this reservation system, I mean, it's still a reservation system, but it seems like it worked out pretty well. And people had their time in the park. It was busy, but it wasn't shoulder to shoulder crazy. And I think that seemed like it really worked. People were able to ride the ride at least once, maybe twice sometimes. And if they were able to get reservations, do the lightsabers and the droids and all that good stuff too. And a lot of really great videos online with the lightsabers and the holocrons and the droids. Oh my. And just all the different things you can do there. And not everybody was able to do everything right in your little, I think it was a 4-hour block, something like that. But it sounds so far so good. And it got me really excited about this in Florida when we're there later this year. And hopefully being able to experience it. Problem being, Florida is probably not going to do this reservation system. They don't at least have any signs that they're going to, which means that it's a free-for-all, which is what they've done in other ones. And that's pretty concerning about when is it going to be reasonable. And your expectations have to be very, very measured if that's going to be the case. So we've been debating this a lot within the Dance Dad community because that's our thing. And if we don't hear anything by, end of this month, June or beginning of July, then all likelihood it's just going to be good luck, everyone.
Right.
As a non-Disney person, what has been your take on it, though? I'm really curious how you're viewing it. And do you have any excitement as a result of some of the things that you're watching and seeing and hearing?
I would say yes, but it is pretty minimal. I think I've tempered expectations quite a bit because I was expecting, the worst. And kind of to your point, I've not really heard it and I haven't seen it. And I don't know if that's because, part of me thinks there's a natural selection here, right? Of people that have not gone and are not going to go for a while, myself included. And those that went in, they're probably like the diehard people. They're, it's very euphoric and they're honestly probably more understanding than your average public. I'd like to see how this is, a year later from now, right? When all of that's kind of settled in and the park has kind of found its feet and see where it kind of lands. But I think a lot of people went in with tempered expectations. Now, that said, I agree. All the videos I've seen have been pretty cool. Like, I've really enjoyed the lightsaber videos. There was a couple of them that put on the Sith and Jedi holocrons and, that and combining them all. I saw some of the footage of Hondo and I thought that was really cool. Star Wars Show had it just recently. I think they did a live show from there as well. So I think I wouldn't say I'm excited. It'd be kind of cool to go, but I'm not really. It's still Yeah, it's in my purview, but not really necessarily something I'm planning for right now. Not quite there.
One of the things I was happy about were we talked about the lightsabers a couple of different times, and concern about whether or not the build quality was going to be there to warrant a $200, thing plus the experience and whatever else. And it looks like it is going to deliver on that price point. When you couple it with the experience, you get a bag. The lightsaber itself is mostly metal, except for the chamber. The chamber is plastic. These kyber crystals look really cool, and they're interchangeable, and they give you a different, and you get a different sound with it too, right? In addition to the different lights. And the holocrons have a similar experience as well, but I think that was really unique. You have, they can monetize all this stuff, but a kyber crystal that's $12 or $13 to go with yours to give it that extended value, I think is a really great move to where if you build one, you can continue to make it more yours over time without going and spending another $200 on it. And so I think that was a really good move, and I'm glad that the quality was there. And then you've still got the option if you want to do a cheaper lightsaber, not in quality, but the Legends, which are more the ones that we're already familiar with, right? So your Luke Skywalker, not Sifo-Dyas, but Dooku's lightsaber and Kylo's and things like that. I don't know why. Sifo-Dyas is on the brain lately, of course. Yeah. But so I was really happy that the value proposition isn't totally disproportionate to what we're going to spend monetarily. So I feel like they did find a pretty good balance right there.
Yeah, I would agree. It's looking pretty promising. And I did, you brought up the aspect of the, buying the crystals and popping those in. And that's a way to kind of extend the life of that, initial purchase, which is kind of neat for a minimal cost, right? Yeah. $12, $13, not a whole lot of money.
I am not buying that Kowakian monkey lizard though, because I've got the Pandora.
You say that now.
I've got the Pandora Banshee, and it just sits in a box, and I'm not going to do the same thing with that silly lizard. So mark my words.
Well, it's on record.
Yeah. Now I do have to get a second and third job to pay for all the other crap we're going to have to buy.
Right.
But
yeah, and the $25,000 droid that you can build.
Thank you. Yeah. So what's really funny, because you said $25,000 like a week or two ago, and then that came out, and it's like, well, that was just one thing, Albert, and you can customize it, colors and all that. Yes, this is the custom R2 droid. Oh, yes, please. Yeah, Father's Day, maybe Father's Day next year. I'll give the wife a little time.
Father's life. I don't know about a day.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about D3 schedules release. Anaheim, August 23rd to 25th. And do you get the sense we're going to get anything, or I guess, what new stuff do you think we're going to get from Disney here with regards to Star Wars?
Yeah, so this is Disney's D23 Expo. It's annual. What we got the schedule, so we know we're going to have an award ceremony. We're going to have Jim Favreau and James Earl Jones are kind of the potential Star Warsy people. Favreau is probably for his Marvel things, but James Earl Jones seems like a shoe-in for Vader stuff. But it looks like we're going to...
Lion King, too.
Yeah, right. Lion King. There's in Jungle Book. So a number of different things from a Legends Awards. He's developing a bit of a history now with Disney. We're also going to get, and we speculated this before, but we're going to get more of a Disney Plus actual preview of the service, which I think is going to be a pretty interesting event. I don't want to say exciting because I don't want to oversell, a preview of a piece of software, but it sounds like we're going to get more of The Mandalorian, although I'm a little hesitant to say more because quite honestly, I bet you we just officially get what we've already seen from Celebration back in April. And that's my guess, right?
Yeah. And the geek in me really wants to see the UI. Like I want to see how they came up with this.
Oh, absolutely.
How you navigate. Because I'm not really the biggest fan of the Disney now, because it used to be Disney, TV. They had was it Disney Channel? Then they had
Disney XD and
then they consolidated all those into Disney Now. And that app, it's got a cool intro and love it. But sometimes it's a little flaky. I'm not really all that impressed with it.
I have a love-hate relationship with that app.
Yep. I'm with you. So it is going to be interesting to see what that looks like. I'm really hoping it's a pretty slick and clean interface and gives us some cool options that we're expecting.
Right.
Given Netflix has kind of set the bar for all of that.
Exactly. And so a couple other things, you get into the Saturday and Sunday shows. So that's all Friday, the previous one. On Saturday, they're going to have a behind the scenes and a sneak peek at some of the live action Disney and Marvel, including the Star Wars project. So assuming this is more Mandalorian and potentially a little bit of sizzle reel stuff, possibly for Rise of Skywalker. I think that's a possible. They're also selling some exclusive guest appearances and other types of things, news and all of that. Again, tempering expectations a little bit. They do reserve some things for D23 that are special, but not really expecting anything super over the top. But I would expect a potential sizzle reel at either this event and maybe again over at San Diego Comic-Con. And then we get into Sunday, of course, it's a Walt Disney Resorts update. But I think where this is maybe applicable to Star Wars is that they've, of course, announced that there's a Star Wars resort, and it's possible we'll get a little bit more news about how that one's shaping up and maybe a few more tidbits about how that's going to work out. Again, it's very early days, so I'm limiting expectations there a little bit from a very Star Wars centric. So that's kind of a rundown of what it looks like will be somewhat relatable to what we're interested in.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm kind of hoping that we get some of the Cassian Andor stuff too, if not a title or just something from this, if they're going to be looking at sneak peeks of live action Disney stuff. So.
Yeah, and it's very possible they might expound a little bit on the scheduling that we had released a handful of weeks ago with the movies going out, with Pandora and Star Wars in particular in a few years from now. So it's possible we'll get a formal announcement of that or a more personal announcement to that, and maybe a little bit of clarity about what the overall direction looks like. Again, those projects are still a little ways away, so not really sure. But again, we have a lot of hope at this time of year, and D23, they do cater to the really hardcore Disney fans. So hopefully they treat them right, and they continue to make this a bit of a spectacle event like they sell it to be, because it's not cheap to be at this thing.
Right.
And what's funny is in social media, there were a few people who said that they wish they were planning to cancel their San Diego Comic-Con tickets because of this schedule for D23 related to Star Wars. That's probably a little overkill, but I see their point that if they deliver on anything that we just talked about in any level of detail, what else could they possibly have for San Diego Comic-Con, knowing that you're still 5 months removed from release of Skywalker or release of Rise of Skywalker? So I kind of see their point.
No, yeah, I get it. And that's always been the case with Disney. Like, they have their own expo, and you expect them, like, that should be their flagship, and that's where their biggest news goes. And then that's not always the case. We get some pretty big news bombs on, the different cons and that sort of thing. But yeah, if it's all the same content, then if that's really all you're there for, what's the point in going? There's a lot more to do at San Diego Comic-Con than just Star Wars, but yeah, it's selective. All right. The last thing we have is Star Wars Day at the Joliet Public Library. And so we're fortunate to have some really great supporters, Patreon supporters at that, with Jeff and Stephanie, and both of them attended. I saw their pictures on Instagram. What a cool thing that they do. Is this an annual event that they have?
It looks like it. And I know a couple other people that go as well. They're not listeners, but this is really cool. This is in Joliet, Illinois, right? And which is, I think, more or less a suburb of Chicago-ish, something like that. But man, they go all out. I mean, they have a parade. I mean, and it's an event. It's not just one of these little mom and pop small town things or a baseball. Like, actually, oddly enough, today is June 7th that we're recording this, and it's Star Wars Day with the Houston Astros. So I'm not there, unfortunately, but man, they do it right. They go nuts with this thing. And then they've got people in, they bring artists in, they have the big tank from Rogue One was out there. It was incredible what they had. And you would think, small town type of thing, not a huge deal, but wow, the pictures that Steph and Jeff were sharing with us were just kind of mind blowing of like how big of an event this is and how really cool and how envious I was of why my town can't get its act together and have us do
you're in
something.
A small town.
Yeah, but still to get that concentration of people and love for the franchise and to do it all there in a huge contingent of 501st is just really impressive and really, really cool. And I just wanted to give them a little bit of airtime because that was an amazing event to kind of watch from a distance and made me want to be there.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing those pictures and your stories as well. We got some great stories from both of them, I think, in Discord at one point or another. So, all right, well, that's going to do it for the news. We'll be back in just a second to hit the main topic, Dooku Jedi Lost.
You're listening to an Ear Glue Media podcast. For more thought-provoking content, we invite you to visit eargluemedia.com.
All right, we're back, and let's talk about this. So, again, this is the long-awaited radio drama. And before we jump into that, I'm going to go off script here because we didn't have it, but it's just something kind of we always do here with it. Before we even get into the synopsis, just kind of what were your overall impressions? Because and I'll just set it real quick. We went into this, we didn't get a lot of detail. I mean, there was that one audio clip that we listened to, and I think we commented on that at one of the shows early on, but I really went into this with no expectations whatsoever. In fact, I would just say that candidly, they were pretty low. I wasn't expecting this to be anything good because it was an audio book, and I'm not shunning audiobooks or sliding them in any way, but it was audiobook only, I should say. It was a condensed audiobook at that. I think if this was a novel, it was probably somewhere in the 200, 300 page range, probably even less than that, actually. I think it was only 6 hours. We had a large cast, which I thought was kind of cool, but just from the pieces that we heard, there were some questions. And so all that going into it, I guess, what were your overall impressions with it from I guess, the quality of the recordings and the story itself?
Yeah, I think when you look at the production values, it really was pretty top notch. It was what you expect from an audiobook for Star Wars, and maybe even a slight step above what we normally get. A lot of ambient sounds, sound effects. The voice actors, of course, were very much into it. It was very much radio drama compared with a narrator doing all of the different voices. So I like that dynamic aspect to it, to where you have the differences. You have women playing women and men playing men and different ages, and you can tell the differences. So I think from that aspect, it was quite well done. It was well produced. I think we'll talk a little bit about maybe later, but some of the voices and some of the actors they selected for the voices might be a little jarring compared to what we're used to experiencing. And I think in particular, Dooku was one of the ones that probably is the most front and center with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think I don't remember if we shared the feedback on this on one of the shows or not.
I think we alluded to it.
We may have alluded to it, yeah. So we'll come back to that, though.
Right, but the story, story was good. I thought the story was pretty solid. Actually, the more I listened to it, because I had to listen to it 2 or 3 or 4 different times, and my daughter wanted to hear it. She's getting really into this stuff now. Not Star Wars, but audiobooks in general. Unfortunately, I don't know how that's working, but it was a good story that I liked a little bit more every time because there were things you could continue to peel back. I think as Star Wars fans, those are the things that we appreciate when the authors, and especially with the connectivity it had with Master and Apprentice, there were a lot of things if you sat there and thought about it, or you picked up on something the second time through, and it was short enough to where you could actually do this. Listening to a 13-hour audiobook is a very different experience than 6 and a half, right? So I liked that I kept picking up on things. And even if it was just a throwaway line, like the Nameless, right? They talked, one of the prophecies we got in Master Apprentice talked about the Nameless. So it was just these fun little things that were always present. And I think that helped bring the story alive, even if there were moments in the story that maybe dragged or I cared less about, like a Ramil type of character. But I think overall, it more or less delivered. We can talk a little bit about maybe, is this really an adult type of novel or drifting a little bit more towards young adult or something like that? But I think overall, it wasn't bad. And I love the radio drama concepts. I really hope that this isn't the last time we see something like this. How about you?
Yeah. Well, so I'll give you my just quick thoughts on that. The one question that I want to tackle at the very end that is really still kind of gnawing at me a little bit is, what was the point of this book? And I don't mean I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm saying, if you think about the context of this, the story itself, and the fact that it's Dooku of all people, not this, taking anything away from him, I just really question why this came out. But more on that later. My overall thoughts is, one, if you guys listen to the show, I don't do audiobooks. I normally read the books, and that's just a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with audiobooks. And so I really struggled. I really, really struggled to take any kind of good notes with this, and had a complete disaster with the notes, but that's another story for another time, maybe on CAD. But I really had a hard time, like, trying to listen to it. And because, I've listened to audiobooks in the past and I've enjoyed them, but it's usually on a car ride, right? The kids are in the back and we just want them to be quiet. So we throw an audiobook, and that usually tends to calm them down. But I've never actually listened to an audiobook in this way before. And it was a little difficult at times to kind of keep up, especially when you're trying to write notes and you've got to pause and rewind. There's a Blu-ray delay. It was just all very frustrating. So that experience itself in preparation of the show was super frustrating, and I don't ever want to do that again. But overall, I'm with you. I think I really enjoyed the audio drama presentation of it. It was over the top at times, I will say that, but that is part of what it's like. I mean, if you think back to the old radio dramas of the 30s and the 40s, that's kind of what they were doing, and that's kind of what we got with the original radio dramas from the first three movies. I thought that was all great. Some of the voices, kind of blended at times, so that was a little hard to kind of separate who was talking from time to time.
Right.
But overall, I thought it was pretty interesting, and I'd be all in on actually getting an Audible account and signing up for this thing and listening to them. I don't know if I want to review them every time, but I really enjoyed it. I just feel like they were kind of tipping their toe in the water with this, maybe a little bit, this format and this media, this to say, hey, let's just see how things go. And from what I recall, it was in charting somewhere. I don't know if it's the top audiobooks or maybe it was on Audible only or something, whatever it was. I know at one point it got into the top 5, and I don't know if it got any further than that, but it seemed like it did all well and all things considered. So,
yep,
pretty good stuff. All right, well, let's. Can you give us a quick summary here? Let's start with the summary of the novel and what we got out of it, and then we'll just start jumping into some of the characters and kind of speaking to them.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit about what makes the story interesting for a summary rather than kind of going through the entire arc. So Asajj Ventress, this is early in her apprenticeship to Count Dooku, and she's tasked by her master to find his missing sister, Jenza of Sereno. So in order to aid in Ventress's quest, Dooku provides access to a series of clandestine recordings and personal journals between he and his sister that chronicle the milestones in his life, from Jedi Initiate to Padawan, Master, and then, of course, his final act of leaving the Order, which I think is the part that we were really most interested in digging into. Yeah. So throughout this, we learn about Dooku's relationship with his family, how he was cast out by his father to the Jedi as a baby, and then, of course, only to rediscover his family as an initiate. So he's in his early, I think, was it not quite a teenager, or right at a 13 years old, something like that, when he rediscovers his family. Yeah, the book also it provides a glimpse of his relationship with Sifo Dyas, which is another character that we have long speculated a lot about. And of course, what happens to Sifo Dyas? So what is his descent into madness? All these visions of the future, and what does that actually look and sound like within the context of this story? We see a lot more of the moral hypocrisy and the political corruptness of both the Republic and even the Jedi to an extent, which continues to amplify the frustration that Dooku feels with both of these, governing bodies, if you will. And as it kind of compares with his ultimate sense of duty and responsibility to both his sister and eventually Sereno as the planet and the people. But of course, throughout this, we start to see the dark tendencies continue to surface. And as a result, when he gets, and then especially as he starts to get into a more mature state as a knight, and even as a master, we start to see these things continue to pile up on one another. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Mm-hmm. The story, we're experiencing this really through Ventress and Dooku's eyes and through their lens, right? And while this story is going on, Ventress has her own struggle for her soul, which is taking place with this manifestation of Kyneric, her Jedi master, after Halstead. We've talked a little bit about that in some other shows. He's plaguing her thoughts. There's a dialogue between them more or less through the entire book. And it provides us even some conflicting details about her past that we thought we knew, and about maybe how altruistic or what even Kyneric circumstances were about his exile back on Ratatak. And so this culminates in the moment where she actually has to make a choice. So does she choose to obey Dooku's final dark order, or does she choose to try to escape? But if she
run away, literally.
Right, literally run away, which I don't know if she would be able to do anyway. But if she makes this choice to align with Dooku, it effectively would kill the light within eternally. Now, we know a little bit that's not necessarily true with Dark Disciple, but that's kind of how this book is structured. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. That's the overarching themes and what we're expecting to see from the characters.
Yeah, nicely done. And we'll come back to the Asajj Ventress piece, because oddly enough, that was the one, and I think we were talking about this last night when we had the false start, but I think that was probably, for me, just as interesting as the Dooku story itself, right? Asajj's interest story here, especially when you take the whole context of her story arc and what we know in Dark Disciple and everything. It's just really, wow. I mean, they need to get her. I don't know. It's too late now, but maybe it's not. But I would like to see more of her in some way. But anyways, let's start with the main character, of course, who is Count Dooku. And so you touched on a number of things already about him that we learned early on in the story. And some of these were kind of big bombshells for me, at least, going into this, because it's just things you didn't really think about. You mentioned, his father abandoning him as an infant, literally an infant child, after he found Dooku to be Force sensitive. This guy freaks out and doesn't want anything to do with it. And there's actually a reason for it. Early on, and don't get me wrong, abandoning a baby is not right under any circumstances, but you get the context a little bit later that he had the heebie-jeebies about the Force. There's a whole backstory where the planet's named Sereno because his great whatever grandfathers or relatives fought off the Sith that it had kind of came to power there on Sereno, and they didn't enlist the help of the Jedi at the time. They just took matters into their own hands and wiped these guys out. And so you get the sense that, okay, well, he was a little bit scared because now he has a baby, an infant that's Force sensitive. And so what does he do? Well, he pitches it out, literally puts it out naked in the forest or something out there for like the wolves to eat or whatever. And eventually, he makes it, the Dooku is taken back to the Jedi Order. But that was kind of interesting that his father would do that. And then you get this whole the story with his sister Jenza, who is in close contact with her. And literally up until, he's a master, he is still in contact with her throughout his entire life. You also find out he's got a brother named Ramil. You mentioned him earlier. He's kind of a jerkwad, but the idea that these Jedi, and it's nothing we don't know, but the fact that the Jedi have these relationships early on, and here we have somebody like Dooku who went back to these relationships and kindled them and kept them, and it played a lot into the tragedy of Dooku too. And I want to come back to that a little bit too, because I think my perspective changed quite a bit, honestly, with Dooku. I don't think I like him anymore as a good guy. I'm not saying that, but you definitely kind of feel for him in parts, and it humanized him a lot more than I expected it to.
Right.
Let's talk about Jenza's connection though, because this was an interesting aspect where they had these data pads, and they were it was all kept in secrecy. And there comes a point in the novel, or in this audio, I want to say novel because it's just habit, but there comes a part in the audiobook where Yoda and the council and everybody find out that he's had close contact with her. And I guess one of the interesting aspects of this whole relationship is they don't do anything about it, right? After they find out that he's had this relationship and that he's continuing, he tells them he's going to stop at one point. He's like, let me just do this last thing, and I promise I'll never talk to her again. And it turns out that truly wasn't the case. But it's just interesting that the Jedi didn't intervene or do anything more when they found out, and they allowed him to continue to have that secret communication and exchanging those data pads kind of back and forth. But did you get anything there around the relationship anymore, I guess, with Jenza? Because it was a very loving and endearing relationship too. And literally all the way up until like the last 30 minutes of this audiobook, you got the sense that he really sincerely cared for his sister and loved his sister. As taboo as that may sound, he really did care for her.
Yeah, it did. And it was interesting. You would think, especially after he had to come clean, there's some sort of like house arrest, right? where you get checked up on a lot, make sure you're not doing the wrong things. And even he's still young, right? And then they call them younglings basically until they become knights effectively, or something around that effect. But yeah, I think with Jenza, it was an interesting relationship because he even admits this. She has been his confidant. He doesn't feel like he relates to anybody else in the order. And he had that with Sifo-Dyas for a while, but even that started trailing off as they got older and they became more distant in their relationship. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But I think that was the one constant he had. He always felt different. He always felt unique. I mean, he was selected by the Grand Master to be a Padawan, so by default, there's something special and unique about you, and just didn't fit in. And we got a little of this with Qui-Gon as well at times for Master and Apprentice when he was young. And so it's natural to see that this connection would be there. And also it was something that he never really felt before. The first time that they had the encounter, he felt something different about her, not necessarily about Ramil, but with her. And once they discovered that they were related, it all really snapped together and makes sense. And it was basically this kind of awakening for Dooku, this sense of longing that he really never had. He would have been better off never knowing this, to be honest with you. If he would have never known he had a family, his trajectory would have been probably totally different. Would he have still been frustrated in some things? Yes. But this concept of not being able to let go, and kind of the same concepts we see with Anakin to an extent, just wouldn't have been as problematic had he not been on this trip to Sereno. And they were, so the concept or the idea behind that was the Jedi were going out there for a demonstration, again, trying to kind of connect the galaxy together a little bit, kind of one of those types of missions. But so it was his inability to kind of move on and let go of that relationship. And quite honestly, it's a little surprising that the Jedi Council didn't make more of an effort to stop it, unless they didn't think it was that big of a deal.
No, I would agree. And I know you mentioned Anakin, but what kept just gnawing in my mind the entire time was this whole relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren, because it was very similar. There are a lot of parallels here. If you get a chance, listen to it again and listen to it through kind of that little lens. But if you think about the relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey, it's very similar. Like he just couldn't Kylo can't really let this whole relationship with Rey go. You got that sense from Dooku. It was the same way. Dooku mentions that he was, like you said, a loner. He didn't, he struggled to make friends. Clans didn't work, that kind of thing. And you get the sense that was probably the case with Kylo Ren as well. You could argue, well, I guess it's to be determined just how the trajectory of Kylo Ren's life goes or has changed now that he is, met up with Rey, not only in this Force Awakens, but especially with the relationship in The Last Jedi. And to your point, that house arrest piece of it, you think about somebody like Luke, who was like, no way, completely blew down the house, so to speak, and demanded that relationship stop. Whereas, here is quite the opposite. They allowed it to continue. So there was just things like that where I'm thinking, I wonder if these were all lessons that he learned from Yoda, and maybe he's heard those stories about, how far off the beaten path or the right path these things can take a Jedi or somebody who is following the light, should they continue. And that's why he was so adamant that Rey and Kylo Ren not continue to kind of have that relationship. So, but yeah, it was a good aspect. And as a character, I didn't mind her so much. She was in there and she served the purpose. There was times when I felt like she was just, the damsel in distress, right? She seemed weak at times, and I wish they would have wrote her maybe a little bit stronger. But the fact that she was the one that gave Dooku strength was kind of a cool aspect. He in fact, I think I don't think I have it written down here, but there was a moment in there where he basically credits her when early on they're down in like this, they fall into like a cave, I guess, and the whole thing kind of starts coming down on them. Or is it the assembly, I think, that they're in? Yeah, the assembly. Anyways, they're in. Right. Yeah, so it's starting to kind of all cave in because there's a beast called a Terataka, and he touches it, and there's an earthquake and that kind of thing. And anyway, she pushes him out of the way and saves his life. And she's pinned down, and he's pinned down. And he makes a comment that in that moment, his whole life changed, and everything, the good, the bad, at least at that moment, because he's doing these recordings, he's really talking about the good. But all the good things and everything that he has to live for, he credits her for saving her life, right? And that says a lot about his relationship with her. It says a lot about what he thinks about her, and it says a lot about why he decided to keep such close bonds and close contact with her throughout his life until, again, the tragic ending at the very end. And
she's the one that reached out to him, right? Which is
good point.
Not what he was used to. Someone that would want to do that. He didn't feel like he was in a position to say no because of all the things you just said, due to the bravery of an 11-year-old girl. So who is he to deny that, right? Especially with the connection they had. It was just completely foreign, and he had to pursue it.
Yeah, there's let's talk about Sifo Dyas next, because this is a friendship that it's pretty cool to think that they were friends early on.
Right.
and they even gave each other these little BFF names. They called them Do and Sai, and this harks back to the intro. But Dooku was pretty clear up front that he did not want to be called Do, although it continued on through the book, and I thought it was kind of neat. Some people were really mad about that, but whatever. But I thought the relationship seemed pretty sincere, even with like Dooku's arrogance, right? Which we got a good sense of. Like you got a pretty good sense that this guy was very regal, not only in his fashion and form, but in his head. This guy thought he was above and beyond everyone else, and you could argue that he was. Maybe he was just kind of, he was egotistical and over arrogant and overconfident, but he could kind of, walk the walk, if you will.
Well, and
but even
in one moment, sorry to interrupt. In one moment, he has a moment of frustration where he's talking to Sifo-Dyas, and where he learns about his heritage and the frustration about being found out of that. And he actually says, "I should be more. I should be better." And Sifo-Dyas is taken aback by that and saying, "You don't really mean that." And he backs off of it, but you can really tell that he does mean that. That
he believes that.
He does. I mean, he knows that he's always been a notch or two above almost all of the people around, or potentially everybody around him, aside from the masters. And when you learn that now you have royal heritage and you have this kind of responsibility and this royal blood running through your veins, you can just imagine that feeds the ego just that much more, right? To where when you make a comment like that, you absolutely believe it.
Yeah, and yet there were still times when, I guess we don't have any reason to believe that they were not just best friends. At least in Sifo-Dyas' eyes, I think that was his best friend, and later on, it was probably his master because of all of the problems he was going through with the Force visions and all of that. But there were moments when Dooku was pretty sincere, especially when they were fighting for the masters to pick them as Padawans. They ended up getting picked together to fight one another, and Dooku was still kind of like, "Hey, don't worry about it, man. Just put up your best fight, and don't." Even though in Sai's eyes, he was like, "Forget it. There's no way I'm going to win. This sucks. You're going to kick my butt." That kind of thing. So it did seem like he was at least sincere with him throughout, which just makes his whole death even way more tragic than it really was before, because they go through some stuff together, right?
Right.
Dooku and Sifo-Dyas, and they come out of it together. A lot of times they were there for one another. They've spilled blood together, that kind of thing, and yet it's just a testament to the power of the dark side. This, and obviously with Jenza, a testament to the power of the dark side, and maybe the Emperor's influence and what Dooku ultimately did to both of those as well.
Well, you also, as they start to grow apart throughout the book, you can really feel and get a sense for Dooku's sense of loss, that he has really, and he gets all the more integrated with Jenza as a result, because even his best friend, his kind of partner in crime, literally sometimes, is all of a sudden not there or is withdrawn, and they can't relate anymore. Even though they've still got this connection, they still, I think, value each other's friendship and relationship, but you could just sense this loss that Dooku doesn't really have anything else. And when he and Jenza have a problem later on, after his mother's funeral, you could really kind of sense his loneliness, his isolation of sorts, and start to cling on to other people like Lean Castana, who was Sifo-Dyas' master. So it was interesting, though, and I like that we got that sense of loss, because it does give us other motivations later on for why Dooku takes the path that he does.
Yeah. Let's talk about Lean Castana next. She obviously is, well, I should say obviously because we haven't really talked about her, but she's the Jedi Master who eventually would take Sifo-Dyas as her Padawan, even though during that time, Dooku was really, really hoping that she would pick him, and then he got stuck with, the Grandmaster, Yoda, but he was really wanting her, and she didn't pick him. But interesting enough, she's got a really cool background, because she's really obsessed with this idea of the prophecies, and not only just studying the prophecies, but she's of this mind that there's something to learn here. There's something to prepare for. There are advantages in studying this so that we don't fall victim to the tragedies and the errors of those generations past. And yet this is very contradictory, and we'll probably step on this a couple different times throughout the course of this conversation tonight, but it's very contradictory to the aspects or the opinions, I should say, of somebody like Yoda, right? He's got a totally different perspective on all of this, but more on that in just a second. So I thought that in itself was kind of cool. I immediately thought of Yoda's quote in The Last Jedi, oddly enough, that we are what we grow beyond, because even though she wasn't his master, she kind of ignited that fire inside of him that would eventually get passed on to Rael, which eventually get passed on to Qui-Gon Jinn, right? And so you've got this lineage, if you will, of 4 different Jedi that were obsessed with the prophecies, and this all kind of led up and culminates in the Chosen One prophecy and the events of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Another interesting aspect of her really was about this whole obsession with learning from that past, and throughout the book, she along with Dooku at one point, and then Sifus Dyas a little bit later, but they're on this path of like studying Sith artifacts and going around and collecting them, which is something we know Luke Skywalker to have done. So there's a part of me that wonders if he does this because he came up with this strategy, him being Luke. Did Luke come up with that strategy, or was this something that Yoda now encouraged him to do, given that, he comes to realize at the end of Revenge of the Sith that he was wrong, and that maybe there was merit and there was value in going out and finding these Sith artifacts and studying them and learning from them. And I'm just wondering if there's a story here where at some point after Yoda passes on and the Emperor falls, that it's Yoda that says, hey, you need to go out and get all these Sith artifacts. You need to go out and be an explorer, start studying all of this stuff, both the good and the bad. There is a reason for it, that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering if this kind of started back here, because you got to think Yoda, after what we saw or heard, I should say, in this audio drama, you got to think he had some second thoughts about whether or not he made the right choices by not listening to the prophecies or adhering to them, or studying the Sith and being prepared for their second coming.
Well, or quite honestly, not listening to the other Jedi. Lin Kastana, her whole premise, like you said, her whole premise was that we need to be prepared for a Sith uprising. And Yoda's perspective was very frustrating, right? Because it was very much this kind of sweep it under the rug, like they're gone. We don't need to dwell on that. We just need to live in the present and plan for the future of our Jedi and of our order, type of thing, and really kind of stick your head in the sand with it. And that really frustrated her, because you're right. It wasn't that she wanted to control anything, and she seemed to actually have a fairly good grasp of this stuff, even though they were very much in the pursuit of dark side artifacts. And it sounds like they were coming into contact with either artifacts or something relatively frequently, because of some of the rituals that we learned about and some of the cleansing that they had done from the Jedis of old. But it was this idea, though, that we just need to be prepared. And the other Jedi just don't want to hear it. And Yoda in particular just didn't want to hear it. And apparently they've had numerous arguments over this in the past. And she said she always lost. But I have a feeling it's just because Yoda's always just got this way of making it seem like less of a big deal. And there's no proof, there's no evidence, there's none of that. Of course, we know that's how the Sith work. And that just makes it, right. We know that, so it's like us kind of yelling at the radio saying, no, this is going to happen. Don't be so ignorant to this. But it was an interesting dynamic between them. And you're right, with Dooku, somehow he gets kind of involved with this, and he idolizes her a little bit. Of course, later on in life, we get some suggestive comments from Rael, because Rael likes to be suggestive with things. Mm-hmm. And apparently he gets suggestive with Queens on Naboo, but whatever. But this was another just interesting dynamic of another person to influence Dooku along that path and really start to expose him to certain aspects and open his eyes, like you said, not only to the prophecies, but just to other events in the galaxy, like the cave you had talked about earlier.
Yeah. Well, and just one last thing on her. I think she was kind of like the entry point for him to the dark side, really. Because,
she exposed him first. Yeah.
Yeah. And in a very physical way, because when his very first encounter with her, she's almost egging him on, right? And trying to get him to confess that he had touched the dark side and that kind of thing. And he immediately senses the dark side inside of her. And so he pulls out his lightsaber and starts attacking her, and he's convinced at that moment that she's a Sith, because he feels something he's never felt this is supposedly a Jedi, and yet she's tainted with the dark side in some way. And of course, we come to find out that's really not the case. She's not a dark side character, but she is somebody who is steeped in the dark side history and the lore, the dogma, that kind of thing. She's a historian, a subject matter expert, I guess, if you will. And that comes, and he's not able to kind of distinguish that between, what is the dark side. He just knows that it's there. It's a dark presence. And so he attacks her. But yeah, and from that moment, you got to think that was enough to really kind of spark the interest, at least in the dark side, which would eventually lead him down the path of turning on the Jedi Council, independently of that, then becoming the Sith Lord that we knew he would become a little bit later.
Yeah, the symbolism of the beast within, as he was exposed to the Terataka, and then again, everything he thought he was sensing in her was really coming from within, and that becomes a theme throughout the novel, all the way through the end, where we have the climactic battle, if you will.
Right. And so we got we made mention that Yoda is one who eventually picks him. Of course, we knew that going into this, but Yoda was ultimately his master. And they mentioned that it was a rare honor. I think we got some context of that as to why, and I think it's really just kind of stems to the fact that you got a lot of responsibilities, and very little time to actually take a Padawan once you make it to the Jedi Council. I think we learned that in Master and Apprentice. And to think that the Grandmaster himself would choose somebody even kind of speaks to just how powerful Dooku is, and just how interested Yoda was in trying to shape and mold that raw power, which again did a piss poor job of it. But that's Yoda.
Well, Dooku said it himself. He didn't want to be shaped.
Right. Yeah. No. It's right out of the that was in the audiobook.
Right. But I really liked how they began the training, though. This really gives you an idea of where Dooku was going into this event, where they had some delays in starting their training. Yoda had a lot of work, like you were saying. The Grandmaster is very busy. So they finally do this in the gardens, right? And over the course of a month, Dooku keeps coming back to Yoda, and Yoda just sits there, sometimes levitating, eyes closed, complete meditation. And Dooku is just trying to prove his worth in a variety of different ways. And until at right around this month, he tries to uproot the Force tree, and unable to do it, he finally just has a complete breakdown and opens himself up that he doesn't know everything. And of course, Yoda's line back to him is always fantastic, ready to learn the things that you don't already know. And of course, Dooku is just one of the things we can always say about Dooku is he has this unquenchable thirst for knowledge and information. And I think he understands knowledge is power in a lot of cases, but we finally, you get that eagerness, even with him kind of being laying bare, you still get this eagerness and this enthusiasm to learn. And the way that the voice acting came across, though, seemed a little over enthusiastic, not from an overacting, but just what's your real motive for that? Or is it still this excitement, craving this excitement and then learning all of this? Or is it truly just, I'm just exasperated and please teach me. I just need to know.
Yeah, I like this, the tree part. I liked I will say that I don't know that I was the biggest fan of this 30 days thing. And this is not that particular story is not uncommon. Like I can think of 3 or 4 examples,
sure.
One of which is Steven Seagal, oddly enough, where he went through the same thing and, went out to the dojo in Japan and waited, and, the master wouldn't let him in. You see it in the old, the Chinese martial arts movies where the master refuses to train him, but the problem I had with it is just, I don't understand the purpose of why Yoda was doing this. Like, I get with the tree and all of that, and there was a lesson there. But I had a hard time really reconciling the fact that they went 30 days and they never had a conversation. And this wasn't they never said this in the novel, but I just can't imagine that they didn't this didn't come up, or other Jedi were asking, what's the deal with Dooku? Because he's got to be, after day 3, you got to think he's pretty upset about this, and he's talking to people or asking other people and that kind of thing. But it just felt like it was too long. I don't know if 30 days was really the right thing, but I may be just harping on a stupid minor thing, really.
No, I think there's something to that. Again, we talk about this a number of times. The Jedi don't seem to know how to communicate very well.
Well, and that's my point. It's like, dang, Yoda, really? You're going to do this now? Of all, you got your grand pick, and this is what you do?
Exactly. But I think to an extent, I do understand it, though, of you have to be ready to open yourself. We talked a little bit about this last week with visions and prophecies, right? You have to be ready to open yourself up to learning or to experiencing what it is you need to experience and what you need and what someone wants to teach you. If you go into it already thinking 80, 90 or more than the person that you intend to learn from, then it's going to fall flat. It's not going to work out for you. So yeah, was 30 days too long? Should he have set some expectations? Maybe, how we corporate this stuff to death, maybe is our perspective on it a little bit.
Right.
But I think from are you ready to hear what I have to say? Fundamentally ready to know that you don't, and just to have this humility, I think is what Yoda realized that Dooku needed. He needed this humility moment to where he is just completely laid bare and has nothing except be able to listen and learn from there. And then his trajectory is going to go through the roof. And it sounds like it did. It sounds like it more or less worked.
Yeah. Let's talk about, there's a moment in here where they go to, is it Proto Branch?
Right. Yeah. Our first real hit on a vision.
Yeah. Talk more about that.
Right.
One.
Yeah. So Sifo Dyas starts to experience visions. And this is where we start to understand a little bit about what we speculated with Sifo Dyas over the course of our other content. Mm-hmm. And so he starts to witness basically the destruction of this planet. There's fire, there's casualties. It's just a broad scale. And it impacts his very core. I mean, you kind of see the fractures starting, right? So they go to the Jedi Council and admit to that he's doing this, or that he's having this. And of course we get the hypocrisy start to float back in, where we're not really sure we believe you. And visions, you start to get this idea that there's something wrong with people who have visions, and that maybe, and we kind of see it, we sense it with the prophecies as well. If we could just explore the prophecies, Lean Kasana says, and it gets shut down right away. But to the Jedi's credit, we start to see them come around in order to identify what it is. But even when they start to identify, and they can all start to experience it, they don't want to go help. They don't want to get involved with the affairs. Things will happen. The will of the Force is the will of the Force. We're just here to, carry out its will. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. We also see it with the Republic. The only reason why Proto Branch is really important to its senator is because of it's a agro world, and its primary export is Bacta. And they view that the millions of lives on the planet this is the Republic, not the Jedi. They value the lives of everyone in the Republic over the millions of lives that might lose their life on that planet. Now, this is a temperature controlled planet. They don't have any scheduled things. And what we find out later on, of course, when we get there, because of course we have a secret mission, right, is a solar flare is the cause of this. And all of these floating cities, they've moved all the people up to these floating cities. And it, of course, destroys the technology. It fries. You get this magnetic pulse, right? It fries everything, and everything starts plummeting back to the planet and destroy it. Fire, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, when this was kind of, as I was listening, I started thinking, he's having a vision of Alderaan, and I was like, oh wait, no, that's probably too far away. And then I saw, well, maybe it's Hazian Prime, and he's really seeing that far. But really, the whole purpose of this was just to kind of foreshadow what was to come a little bit later, when Dooku's own planet of Sereno was under attack. And again, Jedi didn't want to get involved, and again, the Republic didn't want to get involved. And so this was just kind of another instance, and that was kind of the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back almost to some extent. And that's kind of why this whole story, or at least this little piece was in there. But it does show a lot of hypocrisy here with both the council and the Jedi. And what I get frustrated with is the lack of consistency. Like, there are some things that we know from Star Wars where they go out and they will send a ton of people to go help and fight and do right and do good. And then other times like this, they're like, sorry, we can't save everybody. Although we just, saved the 2 people on this one mission. We're not going to, and I'm talking about the Clone Wars. You saw that a lot in the Clone Wars, where there's just kind of small missions, and they may or may not have had larger ramifications in the whole grand scheme of the Star Wars storyline. But yet they would dispatch a Jedi out there to help, or dispatch a clone. Well, they had the clones at that point, but they would send out, these armies of people to go out and help. And yet here in this time and age, they couldn't. So I don't know, maybe it was a resource thing, but it just seems like there was not a lot of consistency here in terms of when they decided to jump in and help and be peacekeepers and when they chose not to.
I think that's a great point to talk through, because the Jedi, you're right, they do have limited resources. And Dooku, when he speaks to the Senate as a master, and when he's sitting on the council, he very much says that, there's not enough Jedi to go around. We need the Republic to listen to us and to take heed and to help in these other areas and not reduce or not limit. But I think it's also how integrated the Jedi are with the Chancellor and with the Senate. And Yoda on a number of occasions went and said, I'll talk to the Chancellor. I'll talk to the Chancellor. Well, when did the Jedi need to go get permission for everything? And we've heard this in a couple of different mediums throughout the last couple of years, right? Of why does the Jedi have to have permission from the Counselor? And when we get this, we had this with Legends too, as Luke Skywalker in the Jedi Order as well, and trying to go back to this listening to the Force type of thing, rather than the political side of the Jedi Order and the Jedi Council in particular. So it's you're right. It is very frustrating to have this, because the Jedi aren't able to. I have a little bit of empathy here for them, because I'm sure they want to help, but they're just not always able to. And you have to draw a line somewhere. But you're right. When do you do it? And how do you draw that line? And you can't save everybody type of thing. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But again, some of this is like, what's right and wrong sometimes. And that's where I kept coming back to, is like, some of these things just boil down to a moral decision. And I get a moral decision is very personal, but the Jedi code or what they're trying to aspire to, at the very least, seems like you have pretty clear lines of right and wrong sometimes. And we're not doing always the right thing by the people across the galaxy. And one of the things I liked was you have this sense from Dooku about, again, getting to the people on the ground. We talked about this with Qui-Gon's view of the council, when if he were to join, kind of looking forward, we need to get back to our roots, get back to this blue collar mentality of serving the people rather than maybe serving the Republic.
Yep, that's a good point. Definitely see that that theme kind of repeats itself both in canon and Legends. I was just thinking about some of those instances. Let's talk about one other, I guess maybe the final thing when he's still in his Padawan age, and this is kind of a pivotal thing. I think there's a lot to pull from here, steeped in a lot of lore for sure. But there's a moment when they are in search of these, I guess they're bandits, or they're selling nerve disruptors, these thugs, I guess, and they've tracked them down to a planet called the Susto. I say that right? I forget if that's the right name. Yeah, so they track them down to this planet called the Susto. And it's there that they finally track these guys down. It looks like they're waiting to kind of, make this exchange where somebody's buying these nerve disruptors. And there's a moment in there where Dooku decides to kind of take matters into his own hands. And he goes all Anakin and the Sand People on him, right? He goes and slaughters all of them. And you got, even when they were approaching the planet, they all got a sense that somehow there was, the dark side was here in some way, and later on we find out that this place is really like just tainted with the dark side. In fact, I think the quote from the audiobook says it's a nexus point and a source for all change, right, which was interesting. But it's right after that they're and I'm just going to kind of summarize because we're kind of running along here. But it's after that fight happens, they are, I guess, captured and by a witch. And we can talk about her in just a second. But what's more interesting in this moment is that there's a vision that occurs, and Dooku has this crazy vision of seeing all kinds of things. And this was a really interesting piece from the production quality of it, because there were a lot of voices that were going on in this vision. And we see the visions a lot. We've talked about them a lot from the Darth Vader comics and the Qui-Gon Jinn comic. We've talked about the visions that we saw like in the Clone Wars, and obviously like Force Awakens, Last Jedi, that kind of thing. But this is the first time that someone, I think, tried to do like a true audio vision. And I just want to talk about the technical piece of it, and we can come back to the story because that's probably the more interesting thing here. But this was I had mixed feelings here. There were times when I could hear what was going on, and then there were other times when I really couldn't, and maybe that was the point. But this is where I found myself rewinding and playing, and trying to hear and trying to understand what was going on. And I guess the gist of it I got was the big takeaway here was he hears Order 66 at some point, right? He sees and hears the events of Order 66 and Palpatine and Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi and all of that. But just from a technical aspect, how did you feel about that? Because it was a pretty long segment too. It wasn't just, a quick 1 or 2 seconds. This thing drew on for almost 30 seconds.
Yeah, it was. And you're right. At first I was frustrated by it because I was trying to hear these things, and you'd hear Palpatine, and you'd hear things that were familiar, and then you'd hear things that weren't familiar.
Right.
But when I thought about it more and more, part of me, I think that was the point. It's supposed to give you as the listener this idea that, hey, how do you make sense of this? And then how crazy would that drive you? Not only if you were experiencing it firsthand and your head is just this mess of things and you got this moss all over you too, but what if you were just trying to interpret it and trying to understand it? And so I thought that did a good job of that by running it over and blending some of those, some of the words and some of the phrasing and whatever else was being said, and it not making sense because you just really can't do it. And you think you hear one thing, but maybe it's really something else, and it can really drive you a little batty. And I thought that was actually delivered pretty well when I looked at it from that perspective. I'm going to go on a limb and say that was maybe the point or something to that effect. But that's how I chose to look at it. And I think it delivered from that way of thinking.
Yeah. This planet, we talked about the moss. They mentioned that it's a moving moss and it negates your force powers, which kind of plays into something in just a second here. But you had this question. We were talking about this last night about whether or not this was the same planet that we saw in the Age of Republic Qui-Gon Jinn comic book that we covered. And you and I were on the same page here, but you had a more interesting aspect, and I don't want to steal your thunder, so you can take it away. But you had an interesting aspect here about the planet itself.
I'm trying to remember what that was now.
All right, let me fill you in.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, you had said that the Moss was calling Qui-Gon Jinn. Was it calling Qui-Gon Jinn because it had already called its master in Dooku?
Yeah, there was a connection between them, and so why wouldn't it? Yeah, and something to come back and phrase that was the queen or whatever the thing was that was talking to them called Dooku a conduit. And I think we could agree, and Dooku says this about Qui-Gon later on, that Qui-Gon has a connection to the living force as strong as anybody he's ever known, and he believes will probably exceed Yoda's at some point. If you take that, you could probably transcribe or kind of port Qui-Gon in that Qui-Gon might be a conduit to some extent as well. And I think if you were to draw that line of, why would the planet call out to him? There may have been something else there that they sensed the connection with Dooku and another opportunity.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good theory. The presager of Hakate.
Hakate,
I knew I was going to Hakote?
Something like that.
Hakote. Yep, that's it. Presagers of Hakote. That was I'm just going to call her a witch, but that was her little coven, I guess, if you will, so they were, the moss kind of consumes them. They wake up and they're still kind of bound by the moss and they can't move and that kind of thing. And she's kind of going on this little monologue, of, what they're doing. And basically they're kind of like these dark magic, almost kind of like the Night Sisters, to some extent. And they are obsessed in seeing the future, visions and prophecies. And the way they come about their visions and prophecies is through sacrifice. And I think they mentioned that they've sacrificed hundreds, if not thousands, of people in order to see this. And she was about to make her next three sacrifices in order to kind of see the future and benefit from that in some way. We never know. But it was interesting because there was a moment in there where they initiated this whole ritual of the three. So Sifo-Dyas is, I think, kind of completely lost his mind in all of this. And I wrote it down. They start going into this little chant, right? And it's a way to kind of cleanse the dark side that they've been tainted with at some point here. But he says, we call upon the three, light, dark, and balance true. One is no greater than the others. Together they unite, restore, center, and renew. We walk into the night, acknowledge the dark, and find balance in ourselves, for the force is strong. was kind of neat. Like there was this was a very different take on the Force, and more than just the Night Sisters, because again, they do dabble in the magical aspects of the Force, but there was something really interesting here because we were seeing it from the Jedi almost, right? And this whole idea that and I mentioned this, but let me just touch on it, hit it a little bit harder. They wrap themselves up in these like claws or these, what did they call them?
Balm of the Luminous.
Balm of the Luminous. Thank you. Yeah. They put these wraps around their arms, and I thought of like Rey because I think she's got them on, and there's probably some other characters that are eluding me now that have worn something very similar, but they wrap their arms up in these things and they start talking about them. And the thing that really interested me here is that Kastana mentions that the ancient Jedi used to use this almost daily as part of a ritual, and they would do this whenever they had been touched by the dark side or tainted with the dark side in some way as a way to cleanse them. And this is very similar to communion in Christianity, where, you know, once a week you go to church and you accept the body and blood of Christ, and you're cleansed and you're absolved of your sin. And from just a personal perspective, what that allows you to do is it allows you to just to kind of have a clean slate and not kind of feel like you're weighted down by the guilt and the shame and you know, the negativity of your past sins or the things that you did wrong. And I just thought that was a really cool aspect that this is something that the Jedi used to implore, but have since, you know, strayed away from it and don't do it anymore. And I just wonder if, because they're not doing it anymore, are they more susceptible to falling into the dark side? Or is this one of the things that is, because they've gone away from doing this ritual and have gone away from some of these ancient rituals like this, have the Jedi completely, is this when we talk about they've lost their way, that they don't do that anymore and they go the path of somebody like Yoda, which is to just bury your head in the sand, meditate, and pretend nothing ever happened kind of thing?
I think some of it, the question I have is that, why were they doing it back in the Jedi of old? Like what were they doing that made it feel necessary? Or was it just a standard ritual? Was this just a daily activity or a weekly activity, or, you know, some sort of regular cycle to where this was just part of a, you know, like a prayer type of thing, right? Of where you get into this daily routine or some established routine. Or were they really trying to cleanse themselves of something? And you're right. Kastana had made that point though of we've forgotten so many things that the Jedi of old have left us and taught us. And why shouldn't we do it? Of course, Dooku has an interesting reaction to it. I think you and I probably had the same one, was this is witchcraft, right? You're wrapping yourself with something and you're chanting. There was a lot of chanting in this book, you know, of these things that, like, what are we doing? This is sorcery. This isn't a Jedi's values. But again, you start to see the differences of the modern versus the ancient.
The ancient, yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of where I chalked it up to is, okay, they maybe just back then, 1,000 years ago, they simply acknowledge the fact that we're human or humanistic in some way. We are with sin. We're going to make mistakes. We're not perfect. And we are going to have moments of weakness. And through at least this ritual, they believe that they were able to kind of have a fresh start, learn from their mistakes and get right back on it and acknowledge it rather than burying it or suppressing it and not talking about it. Right, not acknowledging it in any way, just meditate and don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Here's your next mission, kind of thing. And I think that's probably true, because after all of this is done, she tells Dooku that they need it. Don't tell Yoda. I mean, she asks him not to tell Yoda. Please don't tell Yoda we did this thing. So it sounds like it is pretty taboo. And there's probably more to it, right? We're probably oversimplifying some of the nuances here over the course of about 1,000 years, but yeah, that's kind of my take on it, I guess. All right, let's talk about he's now a master, and he decides that he's going to take his Padawan, and he picks none other than Rael, which I don't think we got to see that part of it, but we did get to see a lot of him with Qui-Gon Jinn as his Padawan. And before we get into that piece of it, we were joking about this last night, and Qui-Gon Jinn's, what did we call her? He's a little more spirited. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Than I think we've had in the past.
He was not near as pensive, I think, is what we've gotten used to portraying, or how Qui-Gon's usually portrayed. But yeah, he was very eager, very enthusiastic about many things, especially gambling, I think. Right, yeah. Or dealing with politicians. It was a very different Qui-Gon character than we were used to experiencing.
And I think I'm innocently enough, I think they were just trying to play up on the fact that he was young and he was a kid and right. Very different person. There was a moment in there where he yelled, "Accidents will happen," and it reminded me of a yippee kind of thing.
Yeah,
that quote. But yeah, it was cool. I guess it was fine.
It was a little
harmless.
too Obi-Wan for me, actually.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, Obi-Wan is usually the one delivering those lines, but this time it was Qui-Gon fulfilling that responsibility.
Can you talk about the you brought up this great parallel where between Master and Apprentice and this one where the Master walks in and the Apprentice and the Apprentice walks in and the Master.
Right. Yeah, in Master and Apprentice, we had Qui-Gon studying in Dooku's apartment, and I think at one point he was studying the prophecy or had the Holocron of Prophecy. He was doing his book report, right? And Dooku comes in and really gives him a hard time. What are you doing? What are you doing? Well, in Jedi Lost, we have Dooku doing something, right? And he had the Balm of the Luminous on and he was chanting. And Qui-Gon comes into his room and kind of busts him doing this type of thing. But it was interesting, just kind of mirroring of activities here. Mm-hmm. But it also started to give us like, what are you doing, Dooku? Like, what are you doing behind the scenes? And they don't really explore that a whole lot. But this was a great, very synergistic moment between the books where clearly Dooku is doing things outside of his teachings with Qui-Gon. And we got a flavor of that from Master and Apprentice a little bit. But here we actually see it, and we see the side effect of that and him needing to cleanse himself because your only reason why you're doing that is to get centered. And the way they positioned it in this book was that you're only doing that if you need to cleanse the dark side and kind of wash that off.
There is a moment here with, let's talk about, I guess, who is it? Ramil's crash?
Right.
And where he begins to kind of flirt with the dark side. And it's really when he becomes, I guess it's probably safe to say, once he becomes a master, this is where it's just a succession of like different events that are happening, kind of to your point, where you get a sense that he is just edging ever so closely to kind of crossing that line. And it kind of makes it just, makes him prime for the picking with Palpatine a little bit later. There is I just want to talk about Palpatine just very quickly here. There was one part in this book that was really cool in that we come to find out that it's actually Rael who introduces Dooku to Palpatine, and I forget where they are, what planet they're on at this point in the novel.
I think they were on Coruscant about to leave. Yeah,
and he's like, "Hey, I want you to come meet somebody," and we get Palpatine come out there, and then he starts talking to him. But it's just kind of interesting that it of all things, that's how they were connected. Given it was one of his former Padawans himself.
Well, it makes you wonder if Palpatine was looking at Rael as maybe filling a need. Because it seems like they had a relationship over several months and Palpatine was giving him advice. And we didn't get much more than that, but you get that sense with Rael. He's a little bit of a rebel, a little bit of a rogue. And Palpatine's got his feelers out there. Who's going to fill these needs for me?
Right. Yeah. I wonder, did we talk about that on Master and Apprentice? I don't think we did. But anyways, where are we here? So we get to, let's jump a little bit further ahead here, just in the interest of time, and kind of talk about towards the very end of the novel, really, where there's suddenly a crisis on Sereno. And we come to find out, I think it's pirates that have invaded, more pirates. There's been a lot of pirates here lately in Star Wars stories. But yeah, we've got some pirates that have invaded Sereno. He goes and petitions to both the Council and the Republic and is like, hey, we need some help. And they basically say, no, sorry, we're not going to interfere. We're not going to intervene. And so he just takes it upon himself. He enlists himself, Sifo-Dyas, and
Lean.
Thank you. And they all decide to go out there, and this is all coming from a distress signal, I think, from what's her name?
Jenza. Yep.
Jenza, thank you. We'd be great on the $25,000 pyramid, by the way.
25,000 droid pyramid.
Yeah. Holocron pyramid. Jenza puts out a distress signal and calls her out there. And so they end up showing up there, and they crash their ship, which I thought was hilarious. That's like one of the better moments. They crash their ship on the planet, and they eventually make their way over there and obviously save her. But there's a moment in here where this whole Tirataka beast comes back, and we kind of skipped over this, but there are other aspects of the book where he's learning to influence animals or control animals, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. And he invokes that power in order to kind of take over this beast called the Tirataka, and uses that to pretty much, lay waste to all of these guys, and then kind of even the odds, if you will. But it's through all of that he really, in this whole scene where he's basically defending Sereno, he really touches the dark side, and really it gets more exposed here, more than ever. And the crux of all this is the fact that his brother is the one that's behind this whole thing. Like, his brother is the one that allowed the pirates to come in so that he could rally the forces and be victorious and come out ahead. And after Count Dooku finds out that was the case, ends up killing his brother. So
yeah, and to get there, a couple of things. So one, the council seemed a little bit irritated with Dooku. Jenza asked for your help, Dooku. She didn't ask for the Jedi help. She asked for your help. And that was very pointed as well. And the thing with the Tirataka, though, was that this was the sins of the past. He was repeating what, I won't call him his ancestors, but before the planet was named Sereno, they were using the Tirataka, the enemies that his family repelled. They were using the Tirataka, the Sith were, and they were controlling it. They were basically torturing it, forcing it, bending it to its will in order to wreak havoc. And when it went into its sleep, it was kind of at peace. When Dooku is touching the mind, he's promising it, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to do anything. Don't worry, stay calm. And Lin Castano is doing some of the same things, trying to keep it calm while Dooku's trying to handle business up on the surface. But at the end of the day, Dooku finally loses it and complete control over the beast, and just starts laying waste to everybody while he's up dealing with Ramil. And we get the same lightning that's coming from the beast's mouth is erupting from Dooku's fingers and from his hands. So it was an interesting kind of parallel there of also the very thing his family swore to defend and defeat, ages ago, he is now bringing upon his own people.
Yeah. The whole lightning thing, we haven't talked about that, but that was interesting too, because we didn't really explain how they got away from
the cave. Yeah.
The cave. And it's in that moment when he was having all these visions. Excuse me. Pardon me. In the moment when he was having all these visions, he had visions that he was using lightning. And after he snaps out of it, he still sees the lightning on his hands. And this becomes something that becomes very natural to him. Like, it's almost like he's got a gift for the Force lightning. Of course, we get to see it in Attack of the Clones, in his fight with Yoda and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan and Anakin. But this seems to be something that stems from the Tirataka, I guess, maybe. I don't know. There's probably more there than we saw on the surface, but I did like the fact that they were able to kind of give us some background that this was something that he wasn't just, he picked up from Palpatine well before Palpatine was even around. He was, dabbling in this whole Force lightning kind of bit. So
but then we also see how Sereno became the place that it is that we encounter it later on, where they discover a new resource. They of course, now the Republic is interested in Sereno. As soon as they start to get an idea that there's a valuable resource they can help mine, that we'll help you rebuild, we'll do whatever you want.
Sure.
And he shuts it. He said, nope, we're going to do it themselves. He's going to take the mantle of Count. He's going to unite the families, or the ruling party, or the ruling families, or whatever that is. And we are going to take care of ourselves. And you get back to this very, consolidated approach of just taking care of their own, and which is very much what we've always been, what we've witnessed from the planet of Sereno. And then we start to flash forward a little bit towards how do we conclude Dooku's arc here with Jenza.
Yeah, this is the part, like I said, that just I don't know how I feel about this, and maybe I just need to listen to it again. I've only listened to it twice, to be honest. But it was a little bit disjointed for me, because, and it's real easy just to chalk it up with, well, he's converted to the dark side, and This is just part of it, and it becomes a lot easier to kill the people that you love. But it essentially what it boils down to is he's now in control of Sereno. He's now the apprentice, if not the would-be apprentice of Palpatine, and he's really just needs to start cutting all ties. And if anybody's, if anybody's against him, you're dead. And the whole we're to kind of pull it back to the original kind of storyteller, which is Asajj Ventress. She's on this mission to go find her, and at the very end of the book, she does and brings her to Dooku. And it's all in that moment where he forces, I guess you could say, he forces Ventress to make a decision about whether or not to kill his sister, because you really can't have any. She knows about what's going on. She's his conscious. He doesn't want to hear anymore, kind of thing. And so he forces her to kind of kill her, and which she does. Ventress kills his sister, and so it was a big moment for both Dooku and for her. But it seemed pretty easy for him to do this. And again, I'm maybe oversimplifying this, or maybe I missed something in here. But this is the part that I really had a hard time, given what we had gotten for the last 5-6 hours of the audiobook and how much he loved his sister, that he would go to the extent of killing her. If it seems like he, at a very least, I would have expected him to maybe lock her up or send her away, or even just tell Palpatine, I'm sorry, she's dead, but yet she's still alive, kind of thing. It just, I don't know. I'm not going to say it was out of character, but I don't feel like for me personally, I got enough to really kind of justify his actions in that moment, that he would go that far and do something like that.
Right. And to briefly put a little context around this, even when Ventress finds her and calls Dooku, and he rushes to her when he gets there, you still have this arc of concern. He's what have they done to you? He completely ignores Asajj and goes straight for his sister. So you still get that sense of caring. And you're right. The story got very rushed all of a sudden, to where you kind of like with Anakin, a little bit Revenge of the Sith, although we saw it kind of building a little bit. This one didn't have that opportunity to build. There's a little bit of dialogue between them that basically says that Jenza had planned to go talk with the Jedi about him. She knows about the hooded man. And of course, Ventress is like, hooded man?
Yeah, hooded man.
Right. She starts to get curious about what that means too. And then when that happens, you're right. It's like a light switch with Dooku. All of a sudden you have this cold, calculated person come back. And I think the way I interpreted this, and again, there probably could have been some time that this could have developed a little more naturally. But as soon as he starts to hear how much she may or may not know, and now she's swearing up and down the entire time that she's not said anything to anybody, and that everything is in strict confidence. But just to know that she would go to the Jedi, knowing what he has become or is becoming, is an absolute betrayal to him. And that simply cannot stand. There's too much at stake in order for him to let that stand. And in order for him to grow, like he says, I must release you. And then he gives the command to Ventress, and then she's got the choice to make. And Narek is in her head the entire time saying, if you do this, you're lost. You're done. And she already knows that I kind of got the impression she already knew she was going to make her mind up before then she had really no choice. If she doesn't do it, they're both dead.
Yeah, there was a cool line there too at the very end where he says, "The past does not define you. The future does not define you. I do." And it's right after that
dark side doesn't really set you free very well, does it?
Well, and that's the irony of this, right? And because I think it ends with Ventress saying, "This is who I am. I am free." And like, man, that could not be far from the truth, given what we know what's about to happen. So that's kind of sad in itself that's where, ultimately she ends up. And I do want to apologize. I was looking back at my notes here. We've got so much more that we didn't even cover, like Dooku killing the Terataka, which I thought was kind of cool. But let's talk a little bit. We can talk about, we're going to talk about
Sifo Dyas next week.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a bit of a character dissection for Sifo Dyas. So we will come back and talk a lot more about Sifo.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here too, and we're coming up in an hour and a half already. So we'll come back to that a little in the next show. But let's end with Ventress, because we have touched on quite a bit of her, I guess now, at least some of the bigger parts. But it was interesting that we got a an origin that was similar to the original animated, what's this guy's name?
Clone Wars. Yeah, Tartakovsky.
Yeah, Tartakovsky's versions. A little bit closer to that, where, you know, she was kind of like this, she was like a slave and that she was fighting in the gladiatorial arena kind of thing. Did that resonate with you, I guess? Was it kind of cool to see that for you?
I did. I liked it. I thought it was fine. It wasn't the exact same scene, which I think isn't a surprise when you take something that's effectively Legends now. That we got a little, I mean, and the primary difference between it was Dooku kills the arena master or the enslaver or whatever he was, and the head kind of falls at her feet, and then they fight because she's pissed that he stole her kill. That was hers to take.
She'd been waiting for that. Yeah.
Yeah. She was just biding her time, right? But she got herself in that mess. So I like that we've got that. We still have the story is still true from a certain point of view type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really happy that we didn't completely rewrite her backstory. I thought that made a lot of sense. And again, that gives you that hatred right off the bat for him, that he stole something that was hers to take.
So the Ghost of Kynark is a very interesting aspect in all of this, because throughout the novel, or I guess throughout the audiobook, you hear Ventress having these very long, very vivid, very real conversations with the ghost of Kynark. It's like a voice that's inside of her head. And throughout it, she's constantly denying the fact that he's there. You're just a voice. You're not really here. They banter back and forth. And he's like, well, if I'm not really here, then how do I know this? And that kind of thing. And so you're never really told whether or not he's an actual Force ghost, or is he the consciousness of her, right? The good and the bad, the good conscious, the good piece of it being Kynark, and the evil devil on the shoulder, if you will, being somebody like Count Dooku, and the things that he's making her do. But I guess the question is whether or not you felt like, was he real? Was this the Force ghost of Kynark?
This was really hard because there were times in there where you were like, okay, these are pretty general. These are things that she probably knows and may be suppressed, or is just kind of coming out. But then there were other times you're like, I don't know if she would have known that. Some of the interaction with the other Jedi, there were a couple really small moments to where it really shaded that gray area, pretty dark. It was really difficult to tell if it was real or not. Now, at the end of the day, I think I think I land firmly that this was just her conscience. I don't think this was Kynark. I think this was her self-doubt and her conscience and her spirit. And it was just manifesting itself as Kynark, because really, who else would she have that would have listened? And I think what was interesting though about that was the dynamic of when Dooku starts getting involved at the very end. They have this kind of joint vision. The real war for her soul was finally underway. And we start to question whether Narek's intents were always all that pure with Halstead and saving him, and the scenario of his exile, whether or not that was actually real, or what were the actual scenarios of why he made that choice. And we're not really left with a clear indication of what was the actual scenario. So we've really clouded that part of her history to where she has to choose whether or not it really matters all that much. Because it seems like she really did truly love Halstead, for really lack of a better word, her former master, but was an enslaver, but treated her very well, as we talked about before. And again, she clearly had a strong affiliation for Narek as well. So it was very confusing to try to figure out how real it was. And it did have some good moments though, and then the end just kind of complicated the whole thing. So, but I think it was still just her conscience.
Yeah, I don't know where I sit on it. To be honest, there's at the very end of it, like the way I was trying to rationalize how some of the stuff he knew. I think in one moment in the audiobook, he mentions that he trained with Dooku, and that he and Dooku were like together and used to train. He knew him, that kind of thing. But I almost kind of, chalk that up to, well, maybe she was just so heavily involved in all this data research that these were stories that were coming up through her natural like studying and investigation. And somehow they were manifesting into more memories, right, if you will. And there really weren't somebody talking to her. It's just she was just so clouded, and they were coming out as though it was Kynark.
Right.
That
And he
said,
said, when he said a couple of times, I'm in there. We're all in there. Just look in the data pads. So he didn't have to answer the question.
sure.
Yeah.
There's interesting at the very, very end of the novel, once she kills Jensa, she immediately does a check to see if Kai's there, and he's gone at that point. I don't know. I can't remember now if she actually says something to him or she's thinking about him, but it's almost like that presence completely disappears. And so you could argue that both ways. You could argue that that he was never really there, and this choice that she made was the kind of final step to the dark side, and it was kind of a rebirth, if you will. And she, there's no reason why he would be there, or the fact that he was a Force ghost, and because she had converted over to the dark side at that point completely, that there was no way that he could be in her head anymore. I think it would be pretty eye-opening if it was true that he was in her head, because it would be something that we've not seen before, right? I mean, I guess we have. I'm not saying we haven't. But the fact that how would he have learned this, right? That's where I get caught up on is like,
right.
Okay, well, who taught him this? Because as far as we know from canon, Qui-Gon Jinn was the first to kind of relearn this thing, although we think it was probably out there years past, long ago. But Qui-Gon Jinn was the first one who passed it on to, Yoda, and passed it on to Obi-Wan, and passed it on to Luke, kind of thing. So,
and if I'm honest with myself and with everyone out there, my personal bias has crept in of where I don't want another Jedi Force ghost. So I swung that way because I just don't. And for the very reasons you could argue during his exile that, again, this is a penance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your whole perspective, like we learned in the Vader comic, is to go and get clarity and to commune with the Force. So there's an argument you could probably make with all of that. I just don't like it. So this is my personal opinion kind of creeping in of, I don't think he had enough experience to get that far. And he wasn't in tune with the living Force like a Qui-Gon was, to where he would be able to learn that on his own. Again, we don't really know a lot about Kynarik, but just based on what we saw and his not as strong in the Force as a Qui-Gon or someone else, just again, kind of puts a lot of marks against him being able to do something like that.
Right. All right. So final question. And it's the first question I think I asked, but the purpose of this book, I just found it interesting that we would be doing an audio drama like this, first off, and then we're doing it about Dooku. I've mentioned to you guys, or to you, and probably in the last couple episodes, that there is this audiobook is so steeped in old Republic references. You can probably see where I'm going here. A lot of references. There's a lot of lore. There's a lot of new stuff here that we've never heard about before, and they just throw it out there. I mean, we didn't even get into like the whole Harry Potter and the Boggin collection and all that stuff, where they've got all these different relics and stuff. We didn't mention Momin. We probably should mention him. The Momin mask came up in this one as well. But anyways, I just question why they decided to tell this particular story and why Dooku right here, right now. And I'm just wondering, is it because it was a good story, or is this setting up something for later? Is this a temperature gauge, if you will, for what people's appetites are for this kind of lore, and how, what kind of interest it spurs to maybe go down the path of bringing in some kind of old Republic, or a rebirth of the old Republic, if they want to go revamp the whole thing or something like that. But I don't know. What was any thoughts around that?
Well, quite honestly, I think it was, are people willing to accept this type of format of a book? Less so than the story aspect, just the format. Are we ready to start welcoming back in a full cast audio drama? We've had this before. We've had it with the original Star Wars radio drama. We've also had it with some of the books, the Ord Mantell books, and there's a couple others that had full cast. And are we at this point where we're ready and we want this type of thing? Is it going to perform well enough? Now, when you take that lens and you say, okay, who do I need to tell this kind of story with? You have to limit that pretty quickly to characters that are going to sell well. And I think Dooku was an interesting choice. And I kind of like the idea that it's Dooku, because this is a character where we don't know a lot about him. And to give us a really good idea of why he left and why he becomes part of this famed or infamous Lost 20. is a story that we've always been curious about. It's a story that we've always wanted to know. And to give that across Dooku's life, I think was an interesting way of doing that in introducing this type of format. So I think it's less, it might be less, character driven, things like that, and more, how can I position this for maybe future ideas of this and how well is it going to sell? But I think this was a good story. I don't know I'm trying to think what other story I would have liked to have heard with this that was realistic that we would get, right? We're not going to get like a Luke Skywalker type of thing, but I think this might open that door. Do we get a Luke Skywalker Ben Solo adventure at some point? And could this be that format? Could this be a less expensive, quicker way of doing this type of exploration of characters that we don't have today? And again, you have flexibility and freedom with this type of content because it's not exposed to the masses. And I think that's a really cool opportunity that you have to do a little bit different things and to tell these more niche stories that you don't necessarily have to go and spend a huge budget on to do television or do movies or something like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, something to think about. I guess we'll see. Yeah. I guess I'm okay if they do more of these.
We just won't review them.
Yeah, we just won't review them. I'm kidding. All right. We got anything else do we want to talk about before we get into shout outs and all that?
No, I think we've talked this one pretty good so far.
All right. Well, let's do some quick shout outs.
Yeah, one real quick to my buddy Jamie. We were exchanging some texts around Master and Apprentice. He's listening to the show. Just want to give him a shout out, say thanks, appreciate it. That was a fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we had, I should have marked this down. I will come back and credit this. We had some folks chime in, I think, on Discord and even on social media saying that this was kind of one of the better episodes we've done recently. So thank you to those that said that. I will get your names next time. I just thought about it right now. So thanks for the feedback there. Before we go, last thing, we are doing SWTOR. So we've got the guild. We've got I don't know, maybe like 8 or 9 people now, and I think we're ready to kind of turn this into a social, just more than just a social drinking hour. I think we'd like to really. I don't drink, they do, but I think we'd like to just kind of start doing some more fun stuff like ops and all that. So if you play SWTOR and you listen to this show and you want to come in and put us on your shoulders and carry us over the finish line, we'd really appreciate it because we have no clue what we're doing. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been great with hanging out with Crowley and Kat and Steph and Joe and yourself now. We even got Jonesy in there. No Mike yet. Probably will never see Mike. That's okay. But we've been having a lot of fun. So if you guys are interested, let us know. We'd love to see you in the Discord channel and certainly in game as part of the guild. Or if you just want to help us out, if you're already in a guild and you want to help myself, Jonesy, and the rest of the crew trying to make some progress in the game, we'd love to have your help. So just reach out to us and we'll put the stuff in Discord and the links and all that as well. So, all right. We got any business?
Yeah, we do. The Film Appraisers had a really great episode with Morgan McFly, who has been on The Basement with you and one of our favorites on the network. And they talked through the Willy Wonka, the 1971 Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which of course is a classic family favorite with some really weird moments. And you want to tune in to get to get Joe, Josh, and Morgan's take on Grandpa Joe and whether or not he's a decent human being or not. So it was a really fun episode and a great look back at a show that we all grew up with and have a lot of fond memories of. And of course, Gene Wilder is an amazing actor and really brought that character to life. So strongly recommend that. The Film Appraisers, you can find it on all your favorite podcast catchers, as well as over at eargluemedia.com.
All right. And that's going to do it for this week. Next week, we'll be back to talk about Sifo Dyas because there's a lot to talk about now. He's made his way into the forefront of characters. Okay, I'm probably overselling this, but he is a more important character than he was just about a month ago. So we'll be back next week to talk about him. And Jonesy, I foresee that this episode's coming to an end. Am I right?
We're about to end this, Al. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks, Joe. See you next week.
You're still listening? Wow. That's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good fun stuff. But I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what. So that's your disclaimer.